Have you ever met someone whose very presence made you feel calm, understood, and strangely seen without them saying a word? There's a quiet force in some people that disarms you, not by charm or charisma, but by something much deeper, almost ancient. They don't just hear your words, they feel what you cannot say. This isn't magic. It's the rare aura that only true empaths carry, and it's far more powerful than most ever realize. There is a certain subtlety in the presence of a true empath that escapes immediate notice yet lingers deeply in those who encounter it. Their aura does not seek to dominate a room, demand attention, or shine with artificial brilliance. It is not something performed or crafted through conscious effort. Rather, it emanates from within, a quiet force that draws others inward, inviting a kind of resonance that is rarely experienced in everyday interactions. One cannot easily define what it is about their presence that feels different. Only that being near them seems to still the noise of the world. They possess an internal gravity, as if their very being pulls others closer to their own emotional truth without speaking a single word. It is not charisma, which often stems from the surface self or persona, but something rooted deeper in the psyche, something ancient and unspeakably human. In a society that values spectacle, volume, and an assertiveness, this kind of presence is often overlooked or misunderstood. Yet, it is precisely this quiet power that makes the empath's aura so rare. It is the product of receptivity, an openness to what lies beneath the mask, a deep listening not with the ears but with the soul. They do not react, they receive. And in that space of non-judgmental awareness, others begin to feel seen. There is an invisible exchange occurring, often without words, in which people lower their defenses instinctively, sensing safety without knowing why. This is not manipulation, nor is it performance. It is the natural state of a person whose boundaries between self and other have grown thin, not from weakness, but from an organic sensitivity to the emotional atmosphere around them. This aura is not the result of training or intention. It cannot be faked or manufactured. It is the consequence of a psyche that has remained open where others have closed, a heart that has remained soft where others have hardened. This openness allows them to perceive what is usually hidden, subtle shifts in energy, quiet cues of discomfort, and the unspoken grief that lingers behind polite smiles. Their presence becomes a space where truth is not only allowed but gently drawn out. People sense this even unconsciously and are often drawn to them without understanding why. It is not that the empath seeks to carry others' emotions, it is that others instinctively place their burdens there. Empaths are not merely individuals who feel deeply on a personal level, they are attuned to a realm that transcends individual experience. Their sensitivity does not stop at the boundary of their own consciousness, but stretches far beyond, into the vast field of the collective unconscious. This layer of the psyche, which holds the shared memories, instincts, and archetypal patterns of humanity, becomes especially accessible to those whose emotional and intuitive faculties are finely tuned. Empaths often pick up on emotional currents that have no immediate source in their own life. They may feel a wave of sorrow when walking into a room, or a sense of heaviness when speaking with someone who says nothing at all. This is because they are not only interacting with the surface level of behavior and spoken language, they are engaging with the invisible undercurrents of the human soul, where thoughts and feelings are not always consciously acknowledged or expressed. Their psyche functions almost like an antenna, receiving signals that most people block or ignore. These signals are not random but deeply symbolic and often archetypal in nature. Empaths frequently encounter emotional experiences that echo the timeless struggles of the human condition: grief, abandonment, longing, guilt, not just as abstract concepts, but as lived emotional realities. What they feel in another may resonate with something ancient, something woven into the mythic fabric of our species. This connection allows empaths to recognize and understand emotions that have not even been named, to respond with insight to patterns that have existed across centuries and cultures. The experiences of the past, the energies of those long gone, and the psychological wounds carried through generations can surface in subtle ways through the empath's perception. Because of this connection to the collective unconscious, empaths often feel as though they are living in multiple layers of reality at once. They may find themselves stirred by music, art, or dreams that speak to something far deeper than personal taste or memory. Their emotional responses often reflect a symbolic dimension rather than just a personal one. In this way, they are deeply intuitive beings who absorb not only the feelings of individuals around them, but also the emotional atmosphere of collective humanity. They are drawn to symbols, metaphors, and unspoken truths because these are the languages of the unconscious mind, where so much of what truly moves us resides. True empaths often serve as mirrors, not in the superficial sense of reflecting what is shown to them, but in the profound psychological sense of reflecting what is hidden, denied, or repressed. They hold a strange, sacred power, not one they seek or control, but one that naturally arises from their openness, because they are deeply attuned to the emotional undercurrents of others. They often become the carriers of what others unconsciously try to discard. People project onto them the feelings they cannot face within themselves, their insecurities, their suppressed anger, their unresolved grief. Without realizing it, the empath becomes a container for the unspoken. This dynamic is not about conscious interaction, it is archetypal and involuntary. The empath's presence, simply by being receptive, invites this psychic transfer. The impact of this is often misunderstood. Empaths may feel overwhelmed in certain environments or with certain people without knowing why. They absorb tension, feel sudden exhaustion, or experience emotions that have no clear origin. What they are experiencing in many cases are the unacknowledged shadows of those around them. In Jungian terms, these are the disowned parts of the psyche, the shadow that people cannot or will not integrate. The empath does not choose to become the mirror for this shadow. It is the natural effect of their psychic permeability. Their emotional openness and lack of defensive barriers make them a vessel for the unconscious contents of others. People feel both comforted and exposed in their presence, drawn to them while simultaneously unsettled by what they reflect back. This mirroring can lead to emotional exhaustion if the empath is unaware of what is occurring. Without clear boundaries or self-understanding, they may internalize the emotions of others as their own, leading to confusion, anxiety, or even depression. Yet if the empath becomes conscious of this dynamic, they begin to understand their unique role in the psychological ecosystem. They are not just passive receivers of pain, but participants in a deeper process of revelation. Their ability to hold space for the unspoken allows others to indirectly confront what they have long avoided. This kind of silent healing, the restoration of repressed fragments to consciousness, is not easily seen or praised, but it is one of the most powerful forms of emotional alchemy that can occur between human beings. The aura of the true empath carries with it echoes of something ancient, something that precedes language and modern psychology. It is not simply emotional intelligence or kindness, it is an embodiment of archetypal energy that has appeared across cultures and centuries. The empath unconsciously channels figures found in the myths and symbols of humanity's deepest psyche. The healer, the oracle, the mystic, the wounded sage. They represent a lineage not of blood, but of energy, a psychic thread connecting them to the timeless roles once revered in tribal societies and sacred rituals. These individuals were never rulers or warriors, but listeners, seers, and emotional guides, those who stood between the world of the seen and unseen, helping others navigate the storms of the soul. In modern society, where rationality and performance are valued above intuition and inner truth, this archetypal presence has become rare, even alien. The empath may not understand why they feel so different or out of place, but it is because they are living embodiments of psychic roles that the modern world has all but forgotten. They are not shaped by societal conditioning, but by internal forces that align with something deeper than convention, the realm of symbols, instinct, and unconscious truth. This is why many empaths are drawn to the spiritual, the artistic, the mythical. They sense the pulse of something older than words, a knowing that does not come from books, but from the silent wisdom of being. Others sense this too, though they may not name it. They are drawn to the empath, not as they would be to a friend or advisor, but as one might be drawn to a sacred space, a place where something essential is revealed. There is often a sense of quiet authority in the empath, not built on ego, but on resonance. Their presence does not command attention, yet it rearranges the atmosphere. They do not need to speak to be felt. Like the ancient priest or healer, their power lies in their ability to create a container for what is unexpressed, unresolved, and unnamed. Their presence has ritual quality, even if unintentional, something that slows time, deepens awareness, and invites truth to rise. This archetypal nature also explains why empaths often feel a profound responsibility they cannot articulate. They are not merely helping individuals, they are unconsciously fulfilling a psychological function that humanity has always needed: to witness, to hold, and to heal. The capacity to feel deeply, To sense the unspoken and absorb the invisible weight of others may appear as a profound gift, but for the empath it is also a dangerous path. Their openness to the inner worlds of others, while sacred in its essence, leaves them vulnerable to emotional flooding and psychic exhaustion. In their desire to alleviate suffering, they often become the silent carriers of pain that is not their own. Unlike those who move through life shielded by rational detachment or psychological defenses, empaths move through it with their inner gates wide open. They absorb energies, impressions, and emotional fragments without conscious effort, and in doing so may begin to lose clarity over where they end and others begin. This lack of boundary is not always recognized by the empath, especially in their earlier years when they may interpret their experiences as mood swings, anxiety, or inexplicable sadness. The empath may assume responsibility for emotions that originate outside themselves, carrying the burdens of others in an unconscious effort to relieve or transform them. This inclination is not chosen. It is a feature of their psychic structure. However, conscious awareness and disciplined self-reflection, what begins as a gift can lead to emotional enmeshment, burnout, and identity confusion. The empath may find themselves chronically depleted, unable to distinguish between compassion and codependency. The very sensitivity that allows the empath to feel so deeply is also what makes their inner world susceptible to distortion. The psychic overload caused by continual exposure to unresolved emotional energy can manifest in physical symptoms, mental fatigue, or emotional paralysis. They may withdraw socially, retreating not out of arrogance or rejection, but as a survival response to energetic overwhelm. The world becomes too loud, too fast, too chaotic, and their nervous system begins to fragment under the weight of all that is absorbed and unprocessed. To survive this inner terrain, the empath must learn boundaries not as walls but as sacred containers. They must come to understand that discernment is not unkindness and that retreat is not weakness. Without grounding, without solitude, without conscious practices to clear and center themselves, they risk becoming emotional conduits rather than conscious vessels. What is most dangerous is not the presence of emotion, but the unconscious fusion with it. This is why many empaths are forced to walk the difficult path of self-awareness, not to become less sensitive, but to become sovereign within their sensitivity. The empath's path is incomplete without the undertaking of deep inner transformation. While their sensitivity to others may appear as their most prominent trait, it is their relationship with their own inner world that ultimately defines the rare quality of their aura. To merely absorb or feel is not enough. The empath must journey inward, confronting the emotional architecture of their own psyche, where hidden fears, wounds, and desires reside. The emotional burdens of others they carry are often mirrors reflecting the unresolved terrain within themselves. This mirroring becomes a call, a psychological summons to descend into the unconscious, where real change begins. Such a journey is never easy. It is marked by uncertainty, discomfort, and the stripping away of illusions. The empath, accustomed to turning outward in service or concern, is now forced to turn inward, where no one else's emotions can be prioritized above their own. This descent is not a retreat from life, but an initiation into greater depth. Just as ancient myths speak of heroes venturing into the underworld to retrieve lost parts of themselves, the empath must navigate their own emotional shadows to reclaim what has been hidden or exiled. They must face the internal pain they have suppressed or absorbed, traumas, rejections, unmet needs, without blaming others or seeking escape. The unconscious demands honesty. It refuses denial. Only through this honest confrontation can the empath begin the work of transformation. This is the essence of psychic integration, where fragmented pieces of the self are acknowledged, accepted, and brought into unity. As they move through this process, the empath begins to shift from being reactive to reflective. Emotions no longer consume them as they once did, because now they recognize them as signals, not threats. They develop a kind of inner container, a strengthened psychic core that allows them to feel without being overwhelmed. This is not the loss of sensitivity, but the refinement of it. What once felt chaotic and invasive becomes a well of insight and intuition. They become more deliberate with their energy, more discerning with their attention. Their empathy, once a source of exhaustion, becomes a channel of authentic connection and conscious care. In transforming inwardly, they are no longer the passive receivers of emotional noise, but the conscious participants in the energetic and psychological exchange of life. The empath's aura is not forged solely through their capacity to feel the emotions of others. While emotional sensitivity is an inherent part of their nature, it is only through the integration of that sensitivity with deep self-awareness that their presence becomes truly rare and transformative. Many people feel empathy, but few possess the inner clarity to carry it without losing themselves. The empath, who remains unaware of their own unconscious motivations, may unintentionally absorb pain as a way of avoiding their own, or overextend themselves in relationships as a substitute for self-worth. Without awareness, empathy becomes entanglement and care becomes sacrifice. But when the empath begins to understand themselves, not just as a feeler of others, but as a whole evolving psyche, they step into a new kind of strength, one that transforms their emotional depth into something luminous and healing. This process of integration involves recognizing that their gift is not external but internal. They must begin to distinguish between what is theirs and what belongs to others. They must understand the archetypal roles they unconsciously step into and begin to choose them consciously. They must see where their own shadow hides, perhaps in the desire to be needed, the fear of rejection, or the discomfort with confrontation, and gently bring it into light. As they confront these deeper truths within themselves, their empathy becomes grounded, balanced, and intentional. It no longer consumes them or drives their behavior in unseen ways. Instead, it becomes a wellspring of insight, compassion, and quiet authority. The aura that emerges from this inner work is unmistakable. It is not dramatic or attention-seeking, but deeply calming and authentic. Others feel safe in their presence, not because the empath at death agrees with them or rescues them, but because the empath sees them clearly without judgment. The clarity of someone who has met their own darkness and survived it creates an energetic signature that resonates with the truth in others. People instinctively relax, disarm, and reveal themselves. It is the kind of presence that does not need to speak to be understood. It is felt in the silence, in the stillness, in the unwavering gaze that does not flinch from pain. This aura cannot be manufactured or mimicked. It arises only when deep emotion is met with deep self-knowledge, and when the empath steps into their role not as a sponge, but as a steward of the emotional realm. There is a distinct quality to the presence of an integrated empath, something that transcends verbal interaction and intellectual understanding. When they enter a room, they do not have to speak to be noticed. Their energy communicates before they do. It is not loud or forceful, but grounding and magnetic in its calmness. People often feel an immediate sense of being seen, not with the eyes, but with something deeper. The empath's ability to be fully present, without judgment or agenda, creates a space where masks can fall away and the authentic self can begin to emerge. This resonance is not merely emotional, it is energetic. It works in silence, in stillness, in a glance that speaks to forgotten parts of the soul. It is the kind of presence that requires nothing yet offers everything. A space of quiet permission where another person can finally exhale. This depth of presence is developed, not performed. It comes from having traversed one's own inner labyrinth, from having confronted personal shadows, endured emotional storms, and emerged more whole on the other side. Because of this, the empath does not flinch from pain or avoid the discomfort of others. They do not need to fix, advise, or control. Their power lies in their ability to hold emotion without absorbing it, to hold space without crowding it, to hold truth without fear. This capacity allows others to drop their defenses, to feel what they have long suppressed, and to finally articulate what was once unspeakable. In the presence of such stillness, people often find their own answers, their own clarity, and their own healing. What makes this presence rare is that it cannot be taught in traditional ways. It does not come from books, roles, or techniques. It is born out of experience of having sat with grief, walked with fear, and danced with uncertainty until those elements were no longer enemies but companions. The empath, through this internal alchemy, radiates a kind of frequency that bypasses the mind and touches the heart directly. Their aura becomes less about personality and more about essence. They do not need to convince others of their worth, because their very being speaks it. Those who encounter them may not understand what they feel, but they remember it. They remember the stillness, the sincerity, the rare comfort of being known without needing to explain. The empath's aura is rare not simply because they feel more than others, but because they are willing to go where most people refuse to tread, the deep inner world of the psyche, where chaos, contradiction, and forgotten wounds reside. While many seek to escape discomfort, distract themselves from pain, or numb emotional complexity, the true empath learns to sit with it, to examine it, to feel its full weight without turning away. This capacity is not developed overnight. It is forged through inner trials and solitude, through breakdowns that become breakthroughs, and through long, silent conversations with the self. In this way, the empath undertakes a kind of psychological pilgrimage, one that leads them beyond surface-level living and into the symbolic, emotional, and often irrational terrain of the unconscious. This journey into depth is what separates the true empath from those who simply identify with being sensitive. Sensitivity without reflection can lead to overwhelm, confusion, and reactivity. But the empath who chooses to walk the inner path becomes something more. They become a vessel for transformation, not just for themselves, but for others. They begin to understand the structures of the inner world, how unhealed wounds echo in present relationships, how ancestral pain is carried through generations, how repression distorts the soul. Their insight is not just emotional, it is archetypal. They see patterns, feel undercurrents, and recognize truths that remain invisible to most. The reason this path is so rarely taken is because it demands everything. It requires one to unlearn social conditioning, to confront the ego's illusions, and to face the shadow without flinching. It demands patience, inner stillness, and the courage to feel without fleeing. But those who undertake it and return are changed. They carry within them a different vibration, one that is not shaped by external validation but by inner integration. They are no longer afraid of emotional depth because they have learned to navigate it. They no longer confuse their identity with the suffering they absorb because they have met their true self beneath it. In doing so, they become a kind of anchor in the emotional storm of modern life, someone whose presence signals that it is safe to be human, safe to feel, and safe to let go. Such people are few because such work is hard, but their rarity is what gives their aura its unmistakable depth. In a world that often rewards noise over depth and performance over presence, the true empath stands as a quiet but powerful reminder of what it means to be deeply human. Their aura is not a product of what they do, but of who they have become, through pain, through inner work, and through the courage to feel fully. They carry a light not because they have never known darkness, but because they have walked through it and chosen to return with wisdom.